I'm doing okay. Not great.
I'm
Is this a
sorry.
bit? Are you
Sorry.
doing a bit? Today's episode is focused on the movie Kung Fu Panda 2. And we'll be talking about the movie at length from all sorts of different angles. But I did want to say to our slightly more than zero listeners that there's a question in my mind, and I'm sure there have been questions in people's mind about why we're focusing on such old movies. So Star Trek last week was 2009, and then this movie is from 2011. Eric just informed me, and so we're following a theme of Eric. Last week I picked one of my favorite all-time movies. This week Eric has picked one of his all-time favorite movies, which is Kung Fu Panda 2. And we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by favorite movie and how that changes depending on the age that you see a movie, what it means to you, etc. So, yeah. Okay. So that's the backdrop, but I think that with the next episode, I think we're going to try to return to more current movies, especially since Eric has that all access pass or whatever it's called. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's the A-list.
A-list. Let's first start talking about Kung Fu Panda 2 and what it's about. So let's give a brief synopsis of the movie. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is Kung Fu Panda. So obviously, it's a panda who does kung fu, played
It's Kung
by
Fu
the.
Panda 2. It's a
Okay,
sequel.
we're talking holistically here, just
Okay,
in the concept of
holistically. Okay.
the
Yeah.
Kung Fu Panda universe, Mom. Listen,
Okay.
I think you're gonna need me to be the expert on this. Okay, I understand this is the first time, or this is the first time in a while you've maybe seen the first movie,
Hold on one
and
second. You look to me like you're on sound delay. Can that be fixed?
sound. Kung Fu Panda, the Kung Fu
Kung
Panda
Fu
universe.
Way. Inner
Such a
peace.
great
Inner
inner
peace.
peace, inner peace, inner peace, inner peace, inner peace,
Inner
inner peace.
peace.
Oh my god, this is the lessons. The lessons are coming through here.
Bend, not
Yes.
break.
So, anyways, Poe is a big fat panda, and he's a huge fan of kung fu in the Animal China universe, and he wants more than anything to be just a kung fu master. So that's the whole. That's basically the whole story. So the first movie is basically his origin story, where he actually becomes, the master that he's always wanted to be. And then the second movie goes a little bit more in depth on what happened, why his dad is a goose, because that was not explained in the first movie, and why what happened to his actual parents and where he comes from, essentially. So that's the main conflict for this movie, and it's a very slapstick, hilarious, but also raw and emotional, in my opinion, rendition of this, kind of classic, children's kind of story. So, yeah.
Right. That's a good synopsis.
Thank you.
I should also mention that it's a very stacked cast.
Oh, super stacked.
So
Yeah.
it's stacked with super A-listers, crazy A-listers.
And it only gets crazier the more, like, for each movie, because the second movie brings in Gary Oldman out of nowhere, and then the third movie brings in Bryan Cranston. It's just like very random, very good actors, but you just wouldn't expect.
Yeah, very random, very good actors, and it's utterly crazy. And I laughed and laughed when I saw that Gary Oldman was playing the villain, because I'm really starting to feel like Gary Oldman is in every single movie that's out there.
Yeah.
So he played Winston Churchill. He played Commissioner Gordon in the Batman series. He played. He just played Truman in Oppenheimer. So I just feel like Gary Oldman's everywhere. There's nothing he won't do. But anyway, yeah. So I watched Kung Fu Panda 2, I think just on Friday, in preparation for this episode. And then a couple weeks ago, as you know, while you were still home, I watched Kung Fu Panda, the first one, because I had seen it when you were little. And I have not seen it since, and I felt like I needed more of the backstory, although I'm not so sure I did need the backstory after having seen 2.
Really, yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to start a little bit by talking about animation, because you and I watch a lot of animation, and you watch a lot more animation than I do.
Mhm.
So there's a whole category of there's a whole genre. Um, well, there's big studios and big names when it comes to animation. Disney was the obviously the earliest when it came to making having a big footprint in animation, and all of the early Disney classics were hand drawn. Then you had these other pioneers, like I'm going to say his name wrong, Miyazaki.
Miyazaki, yeah.
Yeah.
Hayao Miyazaki.
Yes, who just came out with his last and final film. So that's a very, very big deal. And so you have, you know, gorgeous animation like that, and then you have Pixar, and then and DreamWorks Animation was definitely in the mix there for a while. Like it was definitely a powerhouse animation studio for a while. So I will say that we'll talk a little bit about what we liked and what we didn't like about the movie later. But I will say that I didn't place after seeing both Kung Fu Panda and Kung Fu Panda 2 recently. I don't place them quite as high as I do Shrek and How to Train Your Dragon. So both of those, which are both DreamWorks animation pieces, um, they were I in those cases, like the stories I thought were just really, really rich and much more multi-layered, and the characters were much more finely drawn, is what I will say. But that being said, I have some positive things to say about kung fu,
You really
and
sound like you're just gonna hate this. Like, did you like the
well, no,
movie?
no, no, but
Oh,
we'll,
great.
but we'll
That's
talk more
awesome.
about that later. I will
Oh,
say
that's
that there are
exciting.
moments. No, that's I mean, I think that you're gonna talk I think that you're gonna as you do many times, Eric, I think that you'll probably talk about what you love so much about this movie, and then, I don't know, who knows, my emotions or my feelings will shift.
Well,
But I wanted to start by talking about animation just because there are sequences in both Kung Fu Panda, the first one and the second one, where the animation is stunningly gorgeous, like, gorgeous. And so, I remember, it was actually when I was watching The Incredibles. Um, yeah, when I was watching The Incredibles for the first time, I was shocked at how they rendered settings like water, for example. So, like when The Incredibles were, and then also surfaces, like metallic surfaces of that big robot thingy.
mhm.
I just remember like being in the audience and being like, God, how did they do that? You know what I mean? Like, how did they do that? And then I was blown away by how Pixar did things like water. I just thought that Pixar's movies were so beautifully, beautifully done. And I've had moments since then where watching an animated movie where I'll just be blown away by how gorgeous it is. So in Your Name, for example, I just remember sequence with the autumn leaves when they're climbing up the mountain, and there's just I was just blown and then also the pencil drawing, and then you could actually see, like, the texture of the lead, pencil on
Mhm.
paper. So it's moments like this that I have the hugest respect for animation, and I also feel that way about Spider-Verse. I feel that way about Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse. There are just moments where I think my eyes almost can't comprehend what it's seeing because it's so
Mhm.
beautiful and it's so fluid. So I will say that just starting off, like just the animation style for Kung Fu Panda is gorgeous, and in particular, I think that they do the landscape and the natural beauty of China really well. So there are many, many recognizable landscapes in China that are rendered gorgeously here in this movie. So they have those famous humped mountains. I forget what they're called. I'm sorry, but they have those famous humped mountains, which on and when actually do look like these shadowy, like humped, beautiful mountains against these misty blue backgrounds, and they do them beautifully. And I especially noticed in Kung Fu Panda 2, there's a scene where the villain was pouring all this metal to melt to make ore to make more weapons, and the pouring of the molten ore was gorgeous. Like I was just sitting there going, "Oh my gosh," on our giant TV, on our giant super high def TV, that looked absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
So I do want to start off with on a good note, which is that I think that DreamWorks was a real contender when it came to really good animation techniques. Like really, really. I don't know what they're doing lately. I know that they just did a Puss in Boots sequel, I think, but
It
I
was
don't
very
think that
good.
they're as yeah, I don't think that they're as much of a contender as they used to be. When it
Interesting.
comes to animation. So that's what I wanted to say about animation. And then the next topic I really wanted to talk about was I wanted to talk about favorite movies versus comfort watches, and I use this as an icebreaker when I'm facilitating meetings. And I sometimes ask people what is the movie that they will watch again and again? What is a comfort watch? And I always try to clarify that this does not have to be a movie that you think is really good, so um a comfort watch can be something that you watched at a certain point in your life, and that it just brought you such joy, and that for whatever reason, whenever you rewatch it, it evokes those same feelings. Like you can actually remember how you felt and why you loved that movie so much. So it's not just something that sits in a time capsule. It's also something that you can keep on re-evoking again and again. So I was going to ask you, do you think that Kung Fu Panda 2 is a favorite movie or a comfort watch, or is it both?
Okay, you just gave me a lot there. Okay.
Yeah, that is a
Um,
lot.
so the thing with Kung Fu Panda is I'm I love the second one way, way, way more than the first one. Like, I think the
Interesting.
first one is great, and I think it's a great, origin story, and it's just a fun movie. But the second one is really where I think it becomes its own, because you were talking about the animation. There were 3 years apart because the first Kung Fu Panda came out 2008, and then the next one was 2011. So just the
Uh-huh.
difference in the quality of animation in between, those 3 years is actually insane. Um, but in terms of like favorite movies or comfort movies, the Kung Fu Panda one is like a comfort movie. I'll watch that any day. I could rewatch it over and over, but I wouldn't say um, it comes to the perfection that I think Kung Fu Panda 2 has, which is funny. And I think it's just because in Kung Fu Panda 2, there's more that emotionally I resonate with than in the first one. Because the first one is sort of just there's a lot of there's just as many gags, but there's not as much weight as or importance in the story as there is in the second one. And obviously, like the quality in animation definitely contributes to how much I love the second one. I went to see The Incredibles because they re-released it as part of the Disney re-releases.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, so I went with a bunch of friends and we all saw it in the theater, um, and it was amazing. It was like it's definitely one of the best animated movies ever made. But I will say, like, with that and Kung Fu Panda, and I hate to say, and I don't want to knock down any points for these movies, but you could just see that animation has improved so much since those movies.
Yeah.
Especially if you look at the backgrounds, the backgrounds in those movies are a lot more flat, and not as fully detailed as they became in movies like Kung Fu Panda 2. And that's not at any detriment to the movie. It's literally just how the technology was. And I still think it's still composed well and very well animated, but you could just see the difference. So just even that difference in quality from the first one to the second one is also what makes me love the second one so much. So yeah.
Interesting. All right. What's interesting is what just occurred to me as you were talking. Was that maybe animation number 1, I know a lot of people who hate animation. They will
It's
I know people who
crazy.
love Marvel superhero movies, for example, but they will not watch anything animated.
Mhm.
And it was the Saturday morning cartoons that actually really fostered my love of Marvel to begin with. So I was a huge X-Men and Spider-Man fan when I was growing up, and I watched them every Saturday morning. So I and Justice League, and so I really came to my love of superhero universe fantasy universe through animation. But it just occurred to me as you were talking, which is that animation has probably got the same challenge that how we talked about VFX last week, which is that when the visual effects are married really well with the story, then it really all sorts of possibilities are unleashed. And I can totally see why you loved Kung Fu Panda 2. I will say that there were moments when the animation and the story came together perfectly, and I'll talk a little bit about what those specific moments are. But there were many moments when it did not come together, and so I'll explain why in a second. But I do want to express a note of concern, Eric, which is that I don't want to yuck your yum, as they say. Like I
No,
don't
not at
want.
all.
Okay, so I don't want to I don't want to rain on your Kung Fu Panda to love, but I trust that you have grown up enough into a person with your own fully formed opinions and feelings,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
so you're fine, right?
Well, I'm just more concerned that you found issues with the second movie, but I would just like to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, but obviously, I think because I looked at the letterbox, ratings and stuff, and most people just saw it as meh, Kung Fu Panda 2, meh, But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have I have a lot of friends that are particularly my age that watched the movie when it came out.
Mhm.
Love, really love the movie, and I think something I just realized recently because my professor sent out a survey and asked what the first theater experience we remember is. And I realized this is the first ever theater experience I remember going to the movie theater and watching. Like I went with dad and
Are you
and I
serious?
yeah, this is I don't remember anything, and this was 2011, so I don't remember anything before that.
You don't
Um
remember the Yayin King?
no, I don't. I really don't. I don't remember going to the theater back then. And
By the
I
way, for Eric's friends out there, that was just the cutest thing about him when he was little is that he could not say his L, so he said
Okay, we're
Yemenems,
gonna
a
hop off this really
Yemenade,
quick. I'm glad you addressed that. That's very funny. Let's
a
move on
Yayin King.
to the more serious topic. I'm just kidding. Yeah.
Okay, all right.
But
So why don't yeah,
well,
yeah.
no. But also, it was the first movie I remember feeling emotionally impacted by. I remember I
Oh,
left the theater.
interesting.
I cried at the theater. And Dad was just like, he, another kids movie. I'm just fucking taking Eric. Whatever. But I was like, oh my god, that was great. And I just remember leaving the theater, feeling great. But yeah, so that's
That's a very powerful moment because
mhm,
my first movie like that was Bambi.
right.
So, my mom took me to see Bambi at the drive-in, and that was the first time that I ever cried at a movie when his mother.
That's brutal. Like,
It was
wow, it's
brutal.
it's always the ones that the parent dies. That's like a huge like Brother Bear. That's another one that very very fucked up story. um, but
Yes, it is. It is
and
parental loss. It, like, touches on childhood's deepest fears, I guess.
yeah, and when I brought this up with other people too, it's always animated movies were the first movies that they remember going to see. So it's something that really resonates with people.
Let's go back to the movie Kung Fu Panda 2, and why don't you start yeah, I think you already have covered some of this ground. So, do you wanna talk a little bit more about why you love this movie so much? What you love so much about this movie?
Absolutely. No. So this was a unique experience, despite probably seeing this for like the fifth time.
Mhm.
But I bought the DVD this time, so obviously I have to watch everything that's on the DVD. So I actually watched this movie twice. I watched it the first time just um, normally, and then the second time, the first movie I ever watched with filmmakers commentary. So you had the director Jennifer Nelson, I think her name is, and then you had the stunt choreographer, the producer. They didn't have the writers, but I think they had some animators on there. So they just talked over the whole movie. I also, as kind of coming out of this, my professor recommended this book called "Making the Cut at Pixar." I think you might notice that I bought that, but it's a whole book
I
just
did.
solely yeah, it's a whole book solely about editing animation, which I've never, I don't know what that looks like, so it's been super insightful reading about how what the process is actually like, especially at Pixar because they make such legendary movies. So it just only you know propelled my love for this movie because I think one of the main things, we were talking about the animation quality, how it was inspired by locations in China. They talked, the director and the producer, they all they talked about how they went on this trip to China to get some inspiration for these actual locations, and it totally inspired all the different renderings and environments that they put in. And they come up with that environment, and they design it and everything, and they come up with the story, and they lay it out, and then once it's all coming together, then they start animating. And they talk about placing the camera in different places. They describe it as an actual space that they create and film the movie in. So it's not like 2D where you have to create, you create just like one kind of 2D background and then animate characters on
Right.
top. Like it's a entire 3D space. So the
Wow,
camera
that's so
moves.
cool.
Yeah, the camera moves and acts like it would just in live action.
Oh,
Um,
that explains something that I actually really like about this film. Go on.
yeah, yeah. And it's not just 3D too. They combine 2D and 3D. In the first sequence, it's like a puppet animation. So they use After Effects, and there's a little tool you can use called the puppet pin tool, where if you just move your mouse around like a puppet, then it moves like all together like you're manipulating it. Um, so yeah, just the quality and animation was super great. And it allows them to have so much freedom with how they actually shoot the movie. And all throughout the movie, in the filmmaker's commentary, they would say like, "Oh, when a certain moment would happen, they would go, 'Oh, Lawrence did that shot,' or like, 'Oh, Paul did that one. That's so cool.'" So like there were animators specifically for fight scenes. There were animators specifically
Right.
for specific design qualities of the film, like the cannonball firework. Somebody designed how that would look, the sparkles and
Yeah,
stuff. Like
yeah,
that's a
yeah.
very unique
They
design,
did
by
a
the way.
really good job. Yeah, they did a
Yeah,
really good job with that. And
yeah,
that's actually it's great to hear you talk about this because it makes you more aware of the love and the craft that went into different sequences and different art elements of the film.
yeah, absolutely. And then another one was, there's that part where Tigress just blasts Poe in the ass so that he just like shoots down a
Yeah.
alleyway to chase the wolf. Um, the animator for that, or the director said that the animator for that had to watch videos of planes like jets, like propelling and like taking off to see what the shockwaves looked like, so that he could add that to the film, which is
Wow.
crazy. There's more I could talk about, but I'd love to hear what else you love or you like.
What you're saying about the animation and the work that people put into the animation and different people's skill sets um, is really helpful, actually. And because it amplifies the things that I liked very much about the film. I did not think that the comedy, for the most part, there were many moments when I felt like the comedy did not work. So when they were uttering like broad slapstick comic lines as dialogue, I actually did not think it was funny. I thought it was just too obvious and childish. One thing that I found incredibly funny in the humor was when what I would call POV shots, So when POV shots were used to make a funny point, then I would laugh out loud because that was a case where the animation and the way that it was shot actually made it the movie funnier. And the classic example of that is when Poe is trying to sneak up on I forget where he was trying to sneak up, on the prison, on the tower. Tries to get inside he gets inside that giant dragon, the big Chinese dragon. And then there's this whole bumbling sequence where he's bumbling around as the dragon, and then most of the time you're looking at that dragon from the side view, right? And so it's mildly funny, but then there's a part where the point of view, the perspective shifts from above. So it's almost like an animated drone view, and so you're watching the dragon and how it's like bumbling around these streets, and like it's got a Pac-Man quality to it. It's just inherently funny. And not only that, but like the sound and the dialogue cease in that because you're just really watching the fight sequence from way above. And that I laughed out loud. It was moments like that where I laughed. There were so many scenes like that actually in pursuit sequences, action sequences, where the point of view would suddenly shift and then I would suddenly laugh because you'd either be looking at it straight from the character's point of view, or you'd be getting this like very funny, like slapsticky, like as something coming right at you, for example.
Yeah.
So that's what I really liked about it. And I what I liked about it though, what I liked about Kung Fu Panda 2, is there's is in strong contrast. It offered a striking contrast to what I did not like about the film. So I could not get past the whitewashing in this film. I couldn't get past it. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I almost think that that's my own failing. I think that this movie is a product of its time, right? So I think that being made in Kung Fu Panda, the first one, um, I think that when an animation studio, for example, like DreamWorks, is trying to establish dominance, or trying to get market share, they're gonna stack their voice cast with A-list actors, right? So they had a pretty literal interpretation of ancient China with all white actors, with the exception of um, Poe's
Jackie Chan
father,
and
who's
Lucy
played by
Liu
James Hong.
and James Hong. Yeah.
Jackie Chan and Lucy Liu, yeah, and then in, Kung Fu Panda 2, you had the addition in addition to those original Asian actors, you had the addition of, Michelle Yeoh as the soothsayer, you know? So, every single time those, actors were voice acting, I felt like the movie elevated in quality. And every single time the many other white actors were acting or black actors were acting, I felt like what the hell is going on, you know? And so I think that before the past decade, like before the last 10 years, I don't think that people questioned the lack of Asian representation in the same way that it's being questioned now. Like, I don't think that opportunities were being given. I don't think breakthroughs were happening. And so I think that we're looking at a movie that is very much the product again of its time and place. And so I totally understand why that doesn't detract for you because of the way that when you saw Kung Fu Panda 2 and how formative it was for you. But me seeing it as an adult, and then having experienced the last 10 years of, slowly making headway in terms of authentic Asian representation, I felt like I was being rubbed the wrong way. Like every time I mean, Angelina Jolie, Seth Rogen, and David Cross, and Jack Black himself could not sound more white. And Shifu, um, the Kung Fu master, is played by Dustin Hoffman, who is a legendary Oscar winning actor and, could not sound more like a nebbishy white Jewish guy. So for me, the whitewashing was a serious obstacle to me getting caught up in the story. And then, but I forgive the movie for that aspect of it because of when it was made and how it was made and the reasons why it was made.
I'm really glad that you brought that up because it's not that my love for movie makes me ignore that at all. Like I think
No, I know.
especially in the first movie, and I think because you mentioned those new actors that they brought in the second one, I think it stands out to me in the first movie way more. But
Hmm.
yeah, I because it's obviously yeah, it's a movie about ancient China. They keep calling it China, right? It's like animal China or whatever, but it's like China,
Right.
and you're it's Asian culture,
Well, I was gonna say that a really good example of, like, Asian culture that's done respectfully. I mean, I think that Avatar, the last Airbender series I think it was produced by 2 white guys. Am I correct?
Yeah, so there's so many examples. There's Avatar who was created by two white guys. There's Mulan written by two white guys, directed by two white
Right.
guys.
But what I'm saying is that they didn't go too literal with the Asian representation. Does that make sense? So, Mulan did. Mulan is inspired by an ancient legend of China, but Avatar specifically said, even though it's done by two white guys, Avatar said that each one of the worlds, like the earthbending worlds or the air, they were all inspired by different Asian cultures, but they didn't try to get too literal about the Asian cultures. Whereas I feel like Kung Fu Panda pushed that a little bit further so that they were actually supposed to be about ancient China, except with animals. And so, do you know what I mean? Like the
No.
landscapes were rendered more. Well, no, I guess it's a difference between when you're acknowledging your influences, right, without trying to be authentic about it. So there's a difference to me between acknowledging this is what I've been influenced by without trying to go too literal about it versus um that versus rendering something quite faithful to the original, except with some very bizarre changes. Like one method makes me notice the whitewashing more than another. That's what
Okay.
I'm saying.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
Yeah,
But
and
anyway, but
I I do understand that, and I agree also because even the Asian actors that are in the movies, they're way less important in the story. I mean, except for the
yeah,
soothsayer, I think Michelle Yeoh did really great in the second one. But in the first one, it's Lucy Liu and Jackie Chan. I feel like they only had like 3 lines each,
yes,
max.
great,
And I think that's
right,
pretty. That's not ideal. But what especially now looking at the background of the film, the director is I think she's Chinese, but she's a Chinese woman. And when they describe their process of making the movie, it is you could tell like it is a product of that time, but also since it was inspired by that trip that they went on to China, and they just saw all these beautiful areas, and they just really appreciated China for its natural beauty.
yeah.
It just came off as a movie where a bunch of friends got together and they were like, "Wow, that was great. Let's just make something so fun and so great."
I understand. I think that
Yeah,
that's a great way to look at it. I think that
yeah,
what you just said is a great way to look at it.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I think that is my own. It's just a block for me that I can't get past. You know,
mhm,
it's a block.
yeah,
The other thing I will just say is that I don't think, and I don't know why. I was just trying to think about how this compares to Shrek or to How to Train Your Dragon, because as you know, we saw How to Train Your Dragon together in the
yeah,
theater, and
yeah,
I love that so much.
yeah.
I don't know why the emotional beats didn't hit as hard for me for Kung Fu Panda and Kung Fu. Both of them didn't hit as hard for me. I think it's because I was distracted by the whitewashing. I was distracted by all the fat shaming, and so um, I think that the fat all the fat jokes, all the weight jokes, which were nonstop, plus the whitewashing. I think that it has to do with whether or not cultural shifts. There's just too much that's happened culturally in terms of cultural changes in order to get to the story. And does the story overcome that? And for me, the story did not overcome it. Um, I don't know if you. I don't. I feel like we've completely neglected your religious upbringing, but the story of Kung Fu Panda is basically the story of Moses.
Really?
I
Okay,
mean,
I
it's
didn't know.
basic. Yeah, it's basically the story of Moses, which is the evil Roman emperor um, uh, decided. I think there was a. See, I'm going to torture my Bible too. It's the New Testament, but he ordered that all the Hebrew male babies be slaughtered in the kingdom, and Moses was saved because Moses was going to be this great prophet. He was stuck in a basket in a basket woven out of rushes, and he was sent floating down a stream where he was raised as a slave. I think he was raised as a slave, as a Hebrew slave. Anywho, uh, my point is, is that the Kung Fu Poe is basically the story of Moses, right? Like you find out that he was lost and that he's trying to discover his birth, and that he's meant to be this great, savior. He is the dragon warrior. I don't think that the story was always. I think that there are some very deep Confucian kung fu concepts like inner peace, for example, or Buddhist concepts that are just thrown around really lightly. So like um inner peace is it's kind of too lightly skipped over in a way. There's only really two sequences that bookend this big idea of inner peace, which is basically what the whole movie hinges on. So for me, the story didn't hold up. Sorry. And then the other thing is that I did think it was funny how in the first movie, when we were rewatching the first movie, and I kept on saying, how does he not know that he's adopted? Because his father's a goose and he's a man. and then the whole, and then then
That's
the
what the
second
whole
movie,
movie's about. Yeah.
yeah, that's a joke. Yeah.
Yeah.
But how could he not realize that he was
Because it's
adopted?
funny. It's hilarious.
I know. I know. There's this moment
He
when
still thinks he came
Tigress
out of
says,
an egg. They say that in the third
I
one.
know.
Anyways.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's this really funny moment where Tigress is like, where he tells him, I'm adopted.
Your dad, the goose.
Your dad, the goose. That's right. That was
And he's like, see, that's really good character animation. Anyways, so what I was going to say earlier. Sorry, what I was going to say earlier was, about the whitewashing. Like, if we had, a perfect society where everybody was represented in media and stuff, then that wouldn't be an issue. Like, or actors that play other animated characters of a different culture or race just wouldn't be an issue, because it wouldn't matter. It's about the voice and the character that you bring, or the character that you bring to the voice. But of course, like, it does matter. It has to matter now, because that's not how society works. But I guess I am more willing to let go, because I resonate more with the story, and I resonate more with the animation and the process and the filmmaking aspects of the movie in general. And I think you mentioned how they're always making fat jokes about Poe, and and the comedy, that you didn't like the comedy. On this pass of the watch, I did notice that if you're just not into that kind of stuff, you will not like a good, like, half, 2/3 of this movie. Like, you will hate it. Like, I was rewatching, I was like, I think that's funny, but I was thinking, like, oh, mom's gonna watch it, she's gonna hate that. Like, and you know what? I think that's great, but I wanted, like, what really matters, or what I think works about it, is because, first of all, the funny fat joke, like, sort of like all the comedy slapstick stuff with Poe, I feel like that's just something, that's who Poe is, and that's his character, and that's what Jack Black brings to the character too. I mean, I think Jack Black can probably resonate a lot with a lot of Poe's themes and whatnot. And if I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I don't know if you like those sort of people, like, that are bumbling, kind of idiots. Like, I don't think you like those sort of people. Just saying. That's for me, knowing what I know about
No,
you.
I was actually just thinking that, Eric. I was thinking.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to clarify that it's not that I dislike fat people; it's that I don't like bumbling idiots. It's like, I don't like.
But it's the fact that
idiots.
it's the fact that he's sort of an idiot, right? The comedy and all that stuff. I can understand how somebody might not like that, but I think the whole backstory about where he comes from, caring about who he is, like, and thinking that oh, this past that I don't know about should matter more. Like, what if that's who I am, and now is not who I am? I think that was what really sold me. And there was in the commentary, they talked about how there were two images that were basically just the framework for the whole movie. It was the little painting with baby Poe and Mr. Pang, the goose. It was just like, and it was the one where he's getting stepped on or something, or the goose is getting stepped on. There's that one, and then the image of his mom, his last moment with his mom, where he's putting him in the basket. Like, they said that they based the whole emotion structure and everything about the movie based on those two images, which I think just totally makes sense, because, like, baby Poe was so cute. Like, those scenes with where he looks so fluffy too in those scenes. And it always makes me so emotional when I see, like, that shot where he's through the doorway with the goose, and he's just feeding him, and it's just so sweet. So that's what I care about.
I actually want to say, I think you're making a fair point about me not liking bumbling idiots, and I will say that it has to do with we've talked about this many times. Number one, I hated the Three Stooges as a show. One of the oldest shows I can remember watching. One of the old, and I could not stand the Three Stooges. There's many, and so it's an interesting thing about what people find funny and what they don't find funny. And I think that for me, any comedy that is based on frustration
Mm,
is hard for me to watch. I don't like the
yes.
buddy road trips where I don't like the stupid, annoying kid messing everything up, you
Right.
know? So I don't like comedy like that. I
Mhm.
do love the type of comedy that you and I talked about recently, where you suddenly realize the absurdity of ordinary situations, you know? So Seinfeld, for example, like when you suddenly talk about why is this ridiculous? Like, why do we have to go see the baby? You know,
Right.
like why or I'm just going to tell him what I think of his fruit, you know, and then I'm going to get myself into this absurd situation where I have to get all my friends to buy fruit for me.
Yeah.
All of that stuff, that's the type of comedy that I love, but I don't think that I'm crazy about. And I also like the comedy, which is what I think you just recently learned about in your class. I like comedy that where the premise is really well established. You know, like the
Right.
premise of, um, that just the absurdity of you're trapped in this situation or you're in this situation. But I don't like frustration that is created or caused because characters are being bumbling idiots.
Right, right. And I think what separates, good movies that do that well from movies that don't do that well is making the characters likable, right? And
Right.
I think there was a foundation of from the first movie where you already know Poe going into this movie that helps with that. But I also just naturally I like Poe. He's so I think he's funny, like and especially when those amazing action set pieces where they're doing all kinds of kung fu styles and stuff. He's always shouting out his moves like kicks of fury, like it's like there's no need to do that at all. Like the Furious Five and whatever, they're so serious. Like they've been doing kung fu for maybe like I don't know 20 years. I don't know how old they are, but like they're all like professionals and stuff. And here's this bumbling idiot who's going around and like shouting all these things. And like I think it's super funny that way. That the contrast of that is really great.
I will say one
Yeah,
bit of comedy that I really thought was funny, was really, really funny, is that every single time Poe's father said something profound,
yeah,
he would say something really mundane at the same time. So
yeah,
he
yeah.
said, so he did this all the time. He said, I made two important decisions that day. I decided that I would serve the soup without radishes, and then I decided to raise you as my son. So
Yeah,
that,
it's
that
great.
was
Yeah, he's so funny.
that was his classic, MO, is that he would always say something very profound and then very goofy at the same time. So
They had a callback to a previous joke that he made in the first movie. He was like, because they were talking about because Poe had this dream to become a kung fu warrior, and he was like, "Well, I had a dream of making tofu, but I just realized I had to give up on my dreams and not make tofu." But in the second movie, if you look at the signs and stuff, it's Dragon
Yeah.
Warrior noodles and tofu. So like,
Ah!
so he picked up his dream. He learned to like follow his dreams. Oh my god, metaphor. Anyways, but another thing that I could see being frustrating is him making frustrating decisions. So like there's so many times, there's like 3 times where he fucks up the mission, right? So like
Yes.
he sees the insignia on the wolf and he can't like bring the wolf down. Then they meet Shen and he sees the thing on the feathers of Shen and he's like, "Oh my god, that's from my past." And then Shen gets away. And then it
I don't
happens
blame
again
him
when
for
they're
any of those things, Eric, though.
no, okay, exactly. But I could see why somebody's like, "Wow, that's stupid. Like, why didn't he just if they had taken care of him, then this would have been over." Especially like the Furious Five, they had this whole they come into the metal room and then they're about to like explode it, but then Poe's there, and then they're like, "Oh, I gotta put it out." That was such a funny scene, by the way. He's like, "I take it back, I take it back," um, or return it, yeah. But so I could see that being frustrating though, because that's one of those like main character makes a bad decision. How do you kind of make peace with that? But I think it's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's that those I tend to forgive those parts because Poe was trying to access and heal from his childhood trauma. So I forgive him for freezing in those
Hmm.
moments. I'm
Hmm.
like, that didn't bother me. It was more of how strenuously he was portrayed as a bumbling idiot on
Yeah.
the other times, and
Yeah.
then also food obsessed. like
Mhm.
totally food obsessed.
Yeah.
So they were constantly like trying to set up this image and then knocking him down because he was eating. So from the very first sequence when he's trying to stuff all those bean buns into his mouth, they're constantly trying to set him up as this glutton, and I don't know. I mean, maybe this is touching on my own issues, my own like body image issues or the pressures that women are under. I don't know. But either way, yeah, I had issues with that. But overall, the experience of watching the movie was very, very uneven for me. Like I'd be watching it and there'd be parts where I'd be laughing and then there'd be parts where I'd be like, I think the story is failing here, Um, yeah, that's just me.
Well, yeah, and I totally understand that.
And they kept on setting things up and not they kept on setting things up and then trying to draw humor over the fact out of the fact that it didn't work. Like when Poe said, "I'm gonna need a hat." And then he like takes his hat and he flings it and it just ends up like
That's
skittering down on
funny.
the roof. I know, I didn't find it funny.
And that
I
what
did
was
not
funnier in
find it
that moment was when he was trying to talk to Shen and like he was too far away. They didn't hear what he was saying.
that
And,
was
and he's
funny.
like, "What?" So funny. Um, yeah. Well, okay. Well, there's so many
Okay,
other things that I think I could talk about with like just how much I love this.
you go.
I think you have to agree with some of the things I might mention.
You go.
Well, first of all, obviously Hans Zimmer. How did you like the score? Did you like the score?
I didn't really notice the score.
Okay,
Will
interesting.
just say. Oh
Ay,
yeah.
ay, ay. Anyways,
Okay, keep
yeah.
going.
So the next one,
Hans Zimmer did that? Holy crap. If you think about the fact that Hans Zimmer did like X versus Kung Fu Panda 2, you know
I
what I
know,
mean? It's just
I know.
all kinds of different movies.
Well, I
Anyway, go
think
on.
that the sequence, where he's finally doing the inner peace thing and he has the water droplet and everything. I think that's one of the most beautifully edited, scored scenes. But yeah,
It
and
is, you
also
know what? You're probably right, Eric, and I was not paying proper attention by that point. But you are probably right because I remember sitting slumped in the armchair out of the corner of my eye and seeing like these I remember being amazed at how the cannonballs were animated. Go ahead.
mhm. No,
I'm
you're
sure I
right.
would appreciate it more deeply.
Yeah. Um, Also, they had I noticed in the credits before I watched the commentary that they had Guillermo del Toro as a consultant, like a creative consultant. So
No way.
he literally just came onto the movie to say like you should do this. Like they described him in the commentary as being like the 14-year-old kid who like wants to do cool stuff in the movie. Like you got to make it cool. Like that's all he matters. That's all that matters. So when he's finally traveling to Gongmen City with the Furious Five, and they have that whole montage where they're like they're training and he's like climbing but he's actually like on the ground because he's like so tired, that the whole montage scene. He said, you got to make a montage like an action scene. Like if you think about what was actually happening, like it was really cool because they were walking really cool and they were like making this journey, but Shen was like preparing for because he thinks this elite warrior is going to come and stop him, but it's just Poe, like, and he's just a
Right.
guy. um
Right.
so
It's
yeah, and
interesting that you
then
mentioned Guillermo del Toro because he's a really great example of sometimes he has a lot of big ideas,
yeah.
but sometimes he gets so excited about how his ideas are rendered that the story starts to get flabby sometimes,
Right.
and sometimes it doesn't. Like, so I think Pan's Labyrinth is his masterpiece. We could do a whole episode about Guillermo del Toro, but I think
Mhm,
Pan's Labyrinth is his masterpiece. But others like Pacific Rim, he was
mhm.
so excited about Pacific Rim before it was coming out and there were moments in that story where you're just like, "Ugh." Like, the
That
story is just completely gone, you
that
know?
movie is a
Go on.
whole 'nother type of good, in another that's like comfort versus favorite. That's a comfort movie for sure, for
Oh,
me at
interesting,
least,
alright.
because
Alright,
it's so
go
it's
on.
big monster, big robot. Anyways, yeah,
I'm very
so
distracted by her giant forehead in that movie.
yeah. I mean, even yeah, no, yeah. Even small things like, they or it wasn't even small. Shen originally, the peacock was not like a kung fu, martial artist. Like he was just, elitist, kind of, oh, I deserve this. Like I'm gonna rule China. I made this
Right,
technology. But like Guillermo del Toro was like, you got to make him, sort of pose equal or like have him be able to do this stuff. Otherwise, he just kind of comes off as like a lame villain. So
right,
they have that sequence where they were gonna put him in front of a mirror when he was getting ready for Poe, but like they thought it was too cliche or whatever. So they just had him like performing all these moves with his blade, and he was like, we meet at last. Yes, yes. And then he turns around, and then the soothsayer's right there, and she's like, "What the hell are you doing?" Yeah. So other stuff about the animation, I think the lighting in this movie was so, and the color, the lighting and the color was what I think set this apart from the first movie.
Agreed.
Yeah,
100% agree.
like there was always the reds, with whenever they were in the metalworks, or whenever they were in the big ass temple thing, there were always
The
the
reds
reds,
were
and then
so saturated, yes.
yes, yes, and then with Poe, it was always like a gold, or like a muted green, or blue, sort of more natural, but contrasting colors to the red. So I think that was like really beautiful. And um, just I noticed like where the light was, like the shadows they would create, and again, that's like all made in that space, that CG space. Um, so that was really beautiful. And then a lot of the stuff they kept talking about, I was talking about how they delegate all these other things to these animators that work on the whole movie, but everything is so democratic. Like they have to they have to storyboard it all first, but even when they start animating from the storyboards, they realize they want to do things differently after they animate it, so they go back and do new storyboards, and then come back, oh, we got to change this, we got to pick these
Right.
things apart, and it's so complicated. Like you could be working on the whole end of the movie way before the beginning, because the beginning's so complicated. Like you just have to wait until, and we don't even know if the beginning works story wise. It worked when we were pitching it, but it doesn't work when we animate it. So they have to do things, redo things constantly, and it's crazy that they did this in 3 years.
Yeah. So we're gonna wrap this up soon so that we
Yeah,
maybe
yeah,
have a shorter episode for once. But I will just say that um I really do have more respect for the movie after hearing you talk about it and hearing you talk about the elements that are good. And I think that, or great. I agree with you actually about the technical pieces. I remember just thinking that the red was gorgeous. I just remember thinking the landscapes were gorgeous. And as I said before, the surfaces really were astonishing, like that you could just see the metal gleaming, you could see the water rippling. I also liked fur in this movie, like how you could see
yeah,
the surface of the furry panda and the furry tigress.
yeah.
Um,
When they
I
hugged,
did
that was
also,
such a great moment.
yes, and I also completely cracked up at the fact that Poe's dad looks a little bit like the actor who's voice acting James Bond.
James Bond. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
there's
can see
like
it. I can
moments
see it.
when his like, yeah, and I thought that was hilarious about The Incredibles, that Holly Hunter, who was playing, you know, uh what's her face, Elastigirl,
Yeah.
in real life she has this very funny way of talking out of one side of her mouth.
Mm.
And so I should talk a little bit like this for, and so
Talks a little bit like this. Yeah.
that's right. And in The Incredibles, you actually see that animated, and
Mhm.
I think that is hilarious when animators do that. I think it's hilarious when they make the characters take on some of the actual facial acting of the actors themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm left. I don't think I like the movie more than I did when we started, but I have more respect for the craft and the work that they put into this. And I will say, Eric, that the whitewashing piece and the representation piece and the time and place piece made me very, very much want to, for our next episode, I actually want to watch uh, some movies that are helmed by Asian directors or Asian producers and feature Asian actors. So I'm keeping an eye on when Joyride stops being just for sale on Prime Video and is actually available for rent.
Mhm.
Because I'm kind of hoping that it can either be Past Lives or it can be Joyride. And I don't think that you have to watch either one of them again since you saw
No, I
both of
don't.
them so
I saw
recently.
them, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'd like to talk about where we're at in the representation of Asians and Asian production too. Asians being more involved on both the production side and the um and whether or not that changes things, like how much that changes things, and did it change things in good ways or bad ways. Like it's interesting for me because in thinking about how much I was bothered by the whitewashing and representation in Kung Fu Panda 2, and I was thinking about Mulan,
Mhm.
and so Mulan was played by Ming Na Wen. Her vocal pieces were um her songs were sung by Leah Salonga, who's a renowned Filipino Broadway actress and singer.
Yeah.
So it had a fair amount of representation. But one of the favorite characters of Mulan, the animated version, is Eddie Murphy as Mushu the dragon. And then you and I don't know how much representation Disney put into the live action Mulan, but boy, did you and I hate that movie. So there are times when, how can I say this? There are times when representation really works and there are times when it doesn't, but I'd like to talk about times when they really made a full on full court press try at representation and true authenticity in the storytelling, and then see how we think that came out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And it's for when they allow the space to be occupied by talented minority, filmmakers that are
Yes.
talented. Like because um
Yeah,
you
because
know
it sucks
the
when they have non-talented ones
yeah
that screw it
the in,
up.
yeah, and the industry was solely dominated by people who were talented that were just white, and they were given more
Yeah.
opportunities. And because I noticed that just normally, because every editor I've ever seen is just a white guy,
Right.
usually. And now it's changing. My half of my class now is like it's like 60% women and like
Yeah.
40% men, which is great. And I think there and a lot of different minorities I think are being represented more recently. But it's like, yeah, there just needs to be more opportunities for those talented filmmakers. And it sucks
Yeah.
when it just sucks when like they are given a chance and they just happen to, like the live action Mulan or Eternals, like with Chloe Zhao, like
Yes, I was just thinking about that. I was also thinking about how incredible Selma was,
yeah,
from Ava DuVernay. And then I thought A Wrinkle in Time was terrible. And that is literally one of my favorite children's books. And so um, there is so much to be said for when people, how can I say this? There's so much to be said when being close to the source material because you are representing, you are a part of that source material. It's part of your identity. There's times when identity helps, and there's also a time when it just doesn't help. Like it doesn't help. It doesn't overcome other things in filmmaking.
yeah.
And so that's a very, very interesting like area, I think, for us to explore because I'm sure, how can I say this? There's got to be more opportunities for Asian filmmakers to be bad as well as good.
Yes, exactly. I was just about to
That's
say
it.
that. Yeah,
Yes, yeah,
because there's so many.
and
There are bad white filmmakers, they're allowed to
everywhere.
make, and they make a fuck ton of money, So
Yes,
it
yeah,
just has to be for everybody.
yes,
Yeah,
it has to be for everybody, and it just has to be good.
yeah,
But anyway, as always, this was one of the fastest times. It's just so enjoyable doing this podcast, Eric,
yeah.
with you. I have not had. I mean, I've been a little bit busy at work and a little bit just exhausted about how busy I am at work.
Mhm.
But not for a second do I ever think about not doing this podcast with you because it's actually one of the things that really keeps me going and is very creative and
Me too.
satisfying. So,
Me too.
so for anyone who's listening and watching, number one, I promise we'll get back to current movies in our next upcoming episodes, and then number two, thank you so much for listening. It's been great.
Well, maybe this tough week influenced how you saw Poe and Kung Fu Panda 2. Maybe you might need a rewatch and
That's
have a
possible.
greater lens, or more rose tinted view
Yeah, I
of
really
the
wouldn't wanna
movie.
rewatch that ever again. Okay.
Okay.
Alright, I love you.
Yes, I love you too. Okay. Thank you.
Bye.